there was never any question that I was going to make the sequels. And once the film was a giant hit, which was like, I finally accepted it about a month after it was released. I said, okay, it's a hit. I can now go ahead. I can make my other movies. I'm going to do this. I realized, one, that this was a perfect opportunity to become independent of the Hollywood system, which is financially independent. I did not want to have to go back to them and ask for more money. I did not want to have them decide which movies I got to make and which movies I did not get to make. I didn't want them to decide, what the ending should be or how they should recut it at the end. So that was my primary goal at that point, was to establish an operation up here in San Francisco that was completely independent. I was pretty much independent as it was. I didn't mind releasing it through them, but it was really going to them for the money and them saying, well, the film is good, but we want to make these changes. That's the part I wanted to avoid. So I decided I was going to finance the film myself. I decided I was going to make it completely independently. But in order to do that, I felt I wasn't going to be able to direct it, that it was just too hard to set up a company, get the money, get the film made, and also be down there on the set every day trying to direct it. So I decided I'd hire a director. I would executive produce it, kind of like you do on television, which is I would pretty much oversee the script, and I oversaw the casting, I oversaw the sets and the art design, the special effects and everything. And I'd hire a director to go in and work with the actors and do a day-to-day, get up at 5 or 6 in the morning and work until 10 o'clock at night. I could show up and be on the set when I needed to be, but I could also help build the company, make sure that we were financially independent and deal with all the other issues that had to go on around it.
I had told George I had never done a special effects picture. He said, don't worry about it. Well, there was a lot of pressure on me from my agent, from myself. Do I really want to do it? Do I not want to do it? Finally, I had a talk with Gary Kurtz. Gary would be on location, which would be Norway and London, and then talked again with George. He says, you just come up with the ideas, draw them, do whatever you do. We'll make it work back in the lab. And they did.
The making of Empire was a whole set of problems that we didn't anticipate. It was quite different than Star Wars. Obviously, as a sequel to a big hit, by this time the highest-grossing film of all time, there was no problem worrying about whether or not it would be successful. The problems were all about what was expected. The picture was a much bigger undertaking than originally conceived. The budget was quite a bit more than we had originally thought. It ended up being closer to $25 million. And it was primarily because the expectation was so high.
I had just finished writing Raiders in, it must have been 78, and I went up to give it to George. When I walked into his office and gave him the script, he threw it on the desk, and he said, let's go out to lunch. And he says, I'm in pre-production on Empire Strikes Back. Lee Brackett, who was writing the script, has died, and I need someone to help me now because we're really under the gun. And I said, well, don't you think you ought to read Raiders of the Lost Ark first before you offer me this job? And he said, if I read it tonight and I hate it, I'll call you up tomorrow and take this offer back. But he called me up the next day, and he loved Raiders, and I went forward that day. I had a new job that day.
The script required, by this time, the whole opening sequence in the snow, and everybody who's dealt with visual effects said never do snow because you can't maintain the color. Minor shifts in temperature control will shift the white to blue. So we ignored all of those warnings and decided to shoot in the snow anyway.
We had a portable tape recording system that had the Dolby noise reduction attached to it and a lot of new stereo microphones. And so we went out after New Hope, and we recorded hours of new material at Army bases and at flight lines around the world for The Empire Strikes Back.
All right, don't lose your temper. I'll come right back and give you a hand.
You see, this was a very primitive time. We had no digital effects. Everything was done the hard way. Thank heaven for ILM.
This was fun. And it was a very different film to shoot because Kirshner was very into it. And Kirshner did a fantastic, he talked like Yoda half the time.
I met Harrison Ford, and I liked him very much. He had sort of an interesting quality. And I started thinking, well, how do you really use this guy? How do you create a Han Solo who has a history and who's a human being? That seemed to be the job that I undertook. I wanted to make these people as real as possible, and Carrie was the key to making him alive.
And right from the beginning, they had this sort of acrimonious thing between Harrison and I, and it was great.
Well, Your Highness, guess this is it.
That's right.
Don't get all muchy on me. So long, Princess.
It was something to play. It was more human.
Yes, Your Highness.
And in the other ones, it was this arch stuff where I was sort of declaiming this stuff to these villains and having to talk in this very odd dialogue that was very arch. And this stuff is more relatable, even though once more Harrison got the better share. I didn't care. It was good to be, part of something that, even if I had to be the goat, I don't care. This was better. And I got a new hairstyle. But of course, it's not remembered.
Come on.
You're imagining things.
Am I? Then why are you following me? Afraid I was going to leave without giving you a goodbye kiss?
I just assumed you're a Wookiee.
I can arrange that.
This one is a darker story than the first one. That was a challenge to make sure that it didn't turn into something that was significantly different than the first film and that would keep the tone going, since this was designed to be 3 films as one film, and to keep it going as the first film had started, and so that they would be consistent with one another.
I was asked by George to come to San Anselmo, and he said, I'm investing my money in the second film. What do you mean, George? It's going to be my money. And the film has to be much better and much bigger and much more complex than Star Wars. Because if the second one doesn't work, it's the end of Star Wars. I said, it doesn't put me in a very comfortable position. And he felt comfortable with it, but I didn't. It's a hell of a responsibility.
Excuse me, sir. Might I inquire what's going on?
Why not?
Impossible, man.
I'm not sure how Norway came on the scene. I think actually that some research was done by possibly Robert, I don't know, Robert Watts, with a view to finding somewhere that was accessible, Square One. It doesn't matter how brilliant the location is. If it's not accessible, then it's not usable. So, it virtually doesn't exist in terms of the film company. So Norway came up as being a possible place because there was a hotel, the foot of a glacier, which sounded good for starters. So we actually went to Norway and looked at this location, and it was absolutely true. The train actually stopped the station and the glacier was immediately behind it. So that became the perfect icy location for Hoth.
This picture starts right off with a bang. It was wonderful the way Mark got into it. I mean, he never complained. It was a harrowing experience, actually, being out there. And it was kind of forbidding. I mean, here we were to start the film in March. It was about 20 degrees below zero.
I was still shooting Star Wars when Mark got into the car accident. It was a rather bad accident. Miraculously, his teeth didn't shatter, but his nose did. He had to have some of his ear put into his nose. So they adjusted the film with this snow monster to, right away in the movie, scratch his face to account for his looks being different.
Each film in this trilogy, Luke goes from being a naive farm boy to learning the ways of the Force. He is on his way at the beginning of this film to learn to use his Jedi powers that Obi-Wan had started teaching him in the first film. But he only had very limited training in that film. But now we see with this snow monster, he's able to use his powers to get his lightsaber back. In the original, we didn't see the ice monster, really.
You heard him. You had the feeling of the ice monster. But for the re-release, George felt that it was good to see this beast. And so a couple of shots were put in of the ice monster, and I don't think it hurt the picture at all. In fact, I think it helps it.
Some of the effects in snow I recorded during a Christmas break back east where I visited my parents' home. And there was a big snowfall in upstate New York at the time. And I had my father go outside and I had him get dragged through the snow, had him run and jump into the snow to get the sound of body falls in the snow. And so we had some realistic snow effects for some of the movements outside. There was a good body fall there, which was mostly my father falling in the snow back in upstate New York.
Oh, this was a delight. We were in Finse, Norway. It was kind of madness. The person that had to throw the snow into the fan that made it look like it was snowing, and it was snowing, they got frostbite.
The first day of shooting, we haul out this big tauntaun, which immediately freezes to death, and you can't move it. I said, okay, we can move the head. That's about it. Let's at least get the breath. The bellows froze. Couldn't work it. No breath. So the prop man said, look, I'm going to pass around a bag and cigarettes. Everybody smoke and blow into this bag, and I'll use that smoke. And so we're standing there like idiots going, everybody on the set, into a bag, and we got about one. I think one is all we got. I began to discover what George had told me before I left. He said, remember, nothing's going to work as you plan it. You're going to have to make it work, improvise. And it was true.
R2 says the chances of survival are 725 to 1.
Playing 3PO is clearly awkward. It was bound to be. It was bound to be from the word go. I knew that. And very nearly, I really didn't want to do the second film, The Empire Strikes Back. Why would I want to relive this really quite a lonely experience? And then I realized, first of all, they were going to pay me for the second one. And secondly, I had developed a fondness for 3PO. I'm kind of glad I know him.
Don't worry about Master Luke. I'm sure he'll be all right. He's quite clever, you know, for a human being.
And as he goes into the snow, he hallucinates and sees Ben again, who just establishes that Ben is still guiding him from the Force and helping him to move forward in his quest to become a Jedi.
It all stems from George Lucas's imagination. And I have a great admiration for him. Somehow a kind of taste he has. His eye is a very true, pure eye. And I trust that. And I trust his little things. I've heard him hesitate over saying yes or no, over a look in someone's eye or something he hears. He can't yet say, do it like this or don't do it like that. I don't think. But he's kind of like, what? I mean, it's like a sort of litmus paper there. You judge of him very well as to what's going on. And he has a total passion for what he's doing. I mean, don't think I've ever come across anyone so immersed and filled. I have an idea he goes to bed in it, wrapped up in it, the actual material.
Number 5. Ben.
In the script of The Empire Strikes Back, one scene we had of Harrison Ford in exterior on the snow planet Hoth was a blizzard. Now, blizzards you cannot create in the open air because of the depth of snow. You can't blow styrofoam through it. Number one, you get styrofoam everywhere. So normally you build a white cyclorama backing in the studio, do it there, blow tons of styrofoam or whatever through and create the blizzard so you can't see through it. You've got to do it on the stage. So we had a real blizzard when we got there and it started. Anyway, I said, we'll get Harrison in because we can shoot the blizzard in a real one. Saves the stage and all of that. I got him flown to Oslo. Because of the blizzard, The railway line was blocked with avalanche. I couldn't get him in on the regular train. I brought him in on a snowplow all the way from Oslo. He arrived at 1 o'clock in the morning. I sent the location manager down with a bottle of whiskey and said, get him here. And he got in. I sat up and waited for him. I said, hello, Harrison. You're on the set tomorrow morning. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. He arrived. The blizzard was still there. We shot it, but we got it. That's like working with what you got.
I've got something.
The sound of the snow speeders were derived from aircraft sounds run through one of our very first digital devices, a harmonizer. And it had the ability to produce a tonality which would rise and fall in pitch as if it were a Doppler effect, the sound made by something in motion. And by running the aircraft recordings through this primitive harmonizer, we were able to get the basic sound of the snow speeders, although the sharpest parts of the pass-bys for the snow speeders were sweetened with a cougar snarl. Animal sounds, being organic and also being expressive, having emotions associated with them, are always useful, even for inorganic objects, be they spaceships or doors or equipment.
They've got really good medical stuff in this. When he loses his arm, they have that thing. Oh, we're so glad you're better.
Master Luke, sir, it's so good to see you fully functional again.
Thanks, Ricky.
When you're continuing characters that have been strongly introduced in a previous movie, you're thinking, well, not only how do they grow, but how are they the same? How are they different? What's interesting? And with Empire, it was clear right from the get-go that it was going to have a different tone than Star Wars. And I think that's part of why George hired Irvin. He wanted it to be a different kind of movie. Well, that had to do with the dialogue, too.
I think you just can't bear to let a gorgeous guy like me out of your sight.
I don't know where you get your delusions, laser brain.
You go back and you look at the first movie, which to me is the greatest Star Wars, because it was like Picasso, it just broke the mold. But the dialogue is very comic book-like, very exclamation mark, do this, do that. Funny, full of great jokes, combined with the exhilaration of what we were seeing, which no one had ever seen before. It was absolutely exhilarating. The dialogue was funny. And I think when we went into Empire, we knew that the dialogue was going to change in the same way that the movie did. And I would try to maintain the humor.
All of this was better to play. But I'm telling you, there was some other weird thing going on the set, too. We were divided up soon after this, and Harrison and I went off to live in the stomach of another slug, and Mark went to hang out with Yoda. So we were separated, and it created, not tension, you were separated. It was just different campus, we were in different classes.
Sir, I am fluent in 6 million forms of communication. This signal is not used by the Alliance.
I studied acting after I made my first picture in order to know what the vernacular of the actor is. I want to know what the actor feels. The insecurity that they feel is terrible. And about all a director can do with a good actor is guide them. You're an editor for what they're doing. You are the only audience. So I think I can do as well as most directors so that they can have an exciting performance that's still a lie and be believable. And that takes a certain amount of ability.
I had a very strong relationship with Kirchner. We had similar tastes and values, and certainly not similar experience, because Kirchner is hugely more experienced than I. But he was an actor's director. He liked actors. He enjoyed their process.
An Imperial probe droid.
It's a good bet the Empire knows we're here.
The original opening of Star Wars had the big Star Destroyer chasing the Rebel blockade runner. Well, that model was only 3 feet long. And in Empire, it required that we had to make several versions of the Star Destroyer, a bigger version for some even closer shots where the detail on the smaller version didn't hold up, so we had to make a bigger version. And then we built a large conning tower section where Han Solo hid his Millennium Falcon on the back of that.
And here's where I had problems. Darth Vader was all black with a black helmet. And sometimes it was very difficult to photograph him. But I had a great cameraman. I had chosen Peter Suchitsky, a Britisher, who I had noticed his work before. And I don't think he'd ever done a science fiction picture, which was good. And this is not science fiction, but it has sort of the feel of it. And he just fell into it beautifully and worked very hard.
You found something.
What you photograph when you see Darth Vader's helmet, of course, are only the highlights. The black just disappears. And here we have the power of Darth Vader.
All Ralph McQuarrie's conceptual drawings were brought over when we began, so Darth Vader's pretty much exactly as McQuarrie designed him. The designer was then taking whatever Ralph's conceptuals were and expanding them into full set designs.
Group 7 and 10 will stay behind to fly the speeders.
This is Joe Johnston, his bit part. He was one of the, storyboard artists and conceptual designers on the film. Joe later went on to become a director, doing films like Rocketeer and Jumanji and Hidalgo, October Sky.
This is our great medical doctor and surgeon, the robot.
Forget the heavy equipment. There's plenty of time to get the smaller modules on the transports.
Take care, sir.
Thanks.
And here we have the goodbye scene. And of course, oh yes, Chewbacca does have emotion. He feels love for not his master, but his associate, perhaps. Chewbacca's sort of a dog, but he's also part man. And so they say goodbye, not sentimentally. That was important to me. I didn't want to make it anything sentimental in the picture. I wanted emotion without sentimentality.
Be careful.
You too.
And so their goodbye is sort of carefully done, let's say. And the sets were built very quickly because we only had 7 stages for over 60 sets. My friend Kubrick had burnt down one a couple of weeks before shooting, which made it very difficult.
The sound of Vader's meditation cube opening was, in fact, the sound of the electrical generator at the Air Force Station on top of Mount Tamalpais in Marin County.
What is it, General?
And we had gone up there one afternoon and recorded the different motors in the radar dome on the top of that mountain. It's since been dismantled, but it was the sound of the generator starting, which we used for the meditation cube.
Peter Suchitsky shot in this film, and he used a more diffused look. He used a lot of bounce lighting and that sort of thing, which gives it a much more elegant look. It did take a lot more time and cost a lot more money to achieve that. So, there was a little bit of concern about getting the film done as a result of the look. But it's a softer look in terms of the lighting.
Admiral. Captain Piet.
Yes, my lord.
And here, of course, you see the effect of Darth Vader done very subtly.
You aren't the man now, Admiral Piet.
Thank you, Lord Vader.
Now look at the size of this set. It's huge. And you only see it for a few moments. In fact, for seconds. Because the important thing is what's happening here. Not showing a long shot and staying on it and seeing all the ships out there and seeing the size. The important thing is this, is Princess Leia telling everyone of the dangers and what they have to do, and it shows her as a leader.
I would like to see the speech again. I know that one part of it was several ion cannons. Oh, and this is like a nightmare. And when I had these long speeches of horror, and you just had to make it through because they weren't going to cover. No coverage. You're standing in a group of people, and someone that you will not be introduced to is going to say some dreck to you that you don't understand. But what about the shields of the Krasnal? The ion cannons will fire several blasts. That's all I remember.
I had pretty much everything I owned already up as collateral. Everything that I had made on American Graffiti in the first film was reinvested into this film. So naturally, I was concerned about the budget because I didn't want to end up losing the whole franchise to a studio that would just, hire whoever they wanted to direct it and take it in any direction they wanted to take it. Not necessarily want to finish the trilogy, but want to turn it into something else. So by being able to maintain those sequel rights, I was able to maintain and keep the story faithful to what the original script had been. And that was a challenge because there was a lot of pressure, for everybody wanting to control the picture. And I was keeping everybody at arm's length, which worked, really well for the production and stuff. Like Kirshner, even though we were close to losing control of the movie, and even though I had a hard time meeting our payroll, I don't think Kirshner really felt that pressure. I think the only pressure I put on him was to make the movie as good as he possibly could.
Echo Station 3TA. We have spotted Imperial Walker.
So now we're beginning the big snow battle. When I first came up here from LA, when George wanted me to move up to work on the show, Ralph McCurry had done a bunch of artwork from the film, and the artwork from this sequence was just phenomenal. And it was just like nothing we'd ever seen before, and it was one of the big things that made me want to leave my happy home in LA and move up to Northern California, and I'm still here after all these years.
I'm 7. We're on our way.
It was just a great sequence conceptually, and then the backgrounds we got from Norway for it were just really spectacular also, and it was probably the most difficult sequence in the whole film to do because of the light-colored backgrounds that we have to put our models over don't work nearly as easily as the dark star fields we had in the first Star Wars.
You still with me?
So taking the artillery thump and the metal shearing machine and the dumpster door squeak, I built loops out of those sounds so they would repeat over and over again at a set rhythm. And we could accelerate or deaccelerate the loop to make the walkers work at different speeds.
Had to get the movie done. So we went for stop motion animation. I brought some friends, John Berg, Phil Tippett, Tom Sanamon, Doug Beswick, friends from LA who I'd worked with on stop motion projects up here. And I tried to keep away from any blue screen in this as much as we could on the walking machines. So we could just sort of do the shots kind of finished through the camera because they were so complicated. There was all sorts of tricky things going on the set also. We had large sheets of bridal veil material partway into the set to give a feeling of atmosphere. So the one walker machine would be crisp and the other one behind it would be a little hazy from the atmosphere. And sometimes we actually shot in smoke, sort of give that atmosphere.
A lot of the design work on these films is really just to come up with things that are unique, don't look like things that we've seen, but seem to fit into the situation. Because we have lots of vehicles and creatures and things, it's always a struggle to try to create something that's recognizable as what it is, but is something that looks completely different, but not so far out that you can't even comprehend what it is.
Rogue 3. Copy, Rogue Leader.
The idea of giant walking machines, wasn't that unusual in science fiction, but it was something I hadn't seen in the Star Wars world yet. So Joe Johnston sat down and did many designs for different kinds of walking machines, and we finally settled on this one.
Activate harpoon.
ILM had a hell of a problem getting this steel cable around the legs because it's so fine. It's a fine line.
And this sequence, the backgrounds on this, I think we were on these things for probably 4 to 6 months shooting these. It was a lot of work. You'd spend 2 or 3 days getting the shot together, getting the camera programmed to do the right move, and then the actual animation time would be probably a day of shooting it, and you'd find out lots of problems and a retake the next day to get it, and then we'd shoot all the speeders that have to be shot to go into it and everything like that. Whenever we had an explosion, like the walker blowing up like this, that was something that Richard Evelyn was involved with and his pyrotechnic crew, and we built a larger model for that. Instead of our little 2-foot ones, we had about a 5 or 6 foot larger one that was made just to blow up, so the scale of the explosion would look a lot better. And then we shot at high speed photography. At that time, I think the highest speed camera we were working with here, because we were still shooting in VistaVision, was probably 72 frames a second. And I don't think we did much higher than that. I don't think we ever went to 4-perf very often, at least, to shoot anything higher than 72 frames a second, which is 3 times faster than normal. So things appear bigger.
Dear, oh dear.
all the laser blasts that are in this, a tremendous number of effects that are added, even the live action scenes where we're putting these blasts coming from the different guns and machinery and everything.
We dug these trenches. I came up months before to this glacier and chose the spot based on where the sun would be months later. And that's where the men were, in these trenches. I kind of wondered, kind of silly, with all these guns shooting at these great big tanks, but that's what you do. Well, maybe one shot will get lucky and go through an air hole or a window or something, because you certainly can't knock them down.
The approach at the beginning was to do the walkers actually motion control, to build robotic walking machines on a small scale that to me seemed like it would just take up the company and never get done and jeopardize the release of the film. So I lobbied for and got my approach to it, which was to do it with stop motion animation, because I thought that sort of mechanical look of stop motion might actually help. So that's one of the first stuff we started with, was the walker sequence. And we made the walkers the size of a normal stop motion puppet, which is sort of as big as your hands are, so your hands can get in and frame at a time, move the figure, step back and shoot another frame of film.
All right. Why are you still here?
Yeah, there's a battle, but it's a ground battle. And it's at the beginning of the movie, not at the end of the movie. That, again, just in terms of going against traditional storytelling techniques of putting their big action scene at the end, the big climax at the end. In this particular film, the climax is really a personal climax between Darth Vader and Luke. It involves a sword fight, but it doesn't involve a lot of pyrotechnics, really.
And get to your transports.
So I wanted this sequence to be exciting and unique, but at the same time, I didn't want it to overwhelm the ending of the movie.
The second unit, Peter McDonald, did a great job of doing the explosions after I left, because I shot for about 10 days, all the actors in the major action, and then he filled in with wonderful things.
So if you look at this, you've got probably 100 or 200 shots going by in about 5 or 6 minutes. And it puts you, right into the thrill of being there, because they're all so energetic and exciting. For some of these shots where the walkers are off in the distance, we made a walker that was about 2 inches tall that we could shoot when they were supposed to be really, really tiny. And yet it was still hand animated, tiny little moves on that just to get through those shots.
Of course, in these battles, we used a lot of the new pyrotechnic effects we had recorded at various army bases in the time that we were out recording prior to Empire. We had recorded pretty much the whole inventory of the United States Army, from small arms up to shoulder-launched missiles, and had gone around the country collecting the different weapon sounds, and then we would rework them and use them for the weapons in this film.
The call sheet reads, no dialogue. He's just screaming into a little tube. But I just over and over again falling face first into white dust. So imagine there's more than one take. Face first. Okay? Do that a lot. That's your day. Come on, here we go.
Did we know that this would work? Each little piece here, I had to guess and say, yep, let's move on. This is good. I say, action. Perfect. First shot. Right. Now we do the second shot. And this was much more complicated. And I set it up, and we shoot it. And it works. And I say, okay, cut. Let's move on. And the cameraman says, don't you want a protection take? Now, usually you do a second take if there's a lot of people, a lot of things happening. And I said, no. Why? Was something wrong? This I had already set up for myself. Well, you said everything was ready. I shot it. It's good for me. Well, a protection take, usually if something is wrong, I said, I can't afford a protection take. This picture will take years to make because of all the setting up and all the intricate things that have to be done. I said, that was a good take. Next scene, we moved. Well, once the crew realized that I would do single takes, they never again asked for a protection take and made sure when they said we're ready, they were ready. There's no more fiddling with lights and with gadgets, you see. And that saved me a lot of time because the idea was if a shot didn't work, then either a piece of it would work or we go back the end of the week, the sets would be gone by then, you see, and build a little piece and try to do something that fit into that area, you see, to that part that you don't have. Never had to do it.
Get her ready for takeoff.
When we'd have problems, we could sit down and say, how are we going to solve this problem? And we got a thing here. What can we do to kind of streamline things? So there was always a lot of cooperation. We were working very closely together to overcome the obstacles that were slowing us down or causing difficulty. This ended up being about a $30 million picture, whereas Star Wars was only 13. You know, those things are always a challenge because ultimately for a director, what you're trying to do is do the best possible job at telling the story. And then Kirsch had some hurdles that there was, you know, I say the story was a continuation. It was a connector between two other films. And we talked about that, and he knew that. And so in a lot of the cases, he knew he couldn't end it, or he knew there wasn't an arc that was going to end this thing that he could deal with and say, okay, this is how I'm going to build this, because the final chapter wasn't out there yet. And he had a vague idea where the final chapter was going, but the specifics, right, hadn't really put down on paper yet. That was his challenge, was to try to do a better job. And I think it's a more elegant movie than the first one.
Great. Well, it's still off maneuver.
So this is the asteroid sequence coming up. This was the first sequence that I actually started shooting on the show. I started shooting with little stand-in models because we didn't have the real Millennium Falcon made yet. So we had a smaller Falcon made for the show that we could maneuver around to do the sequence. It was probably about 2 feet across as opposed to the 5 or 6 foot one that we had for the first show.
Prepare to make the jump to light speed.
They're getting closer.
Oh, yeah? Watch this.
I really love the sequence with Han Solo in the asteroid field. It's one of my favorite sequences. It's just visually, it's very exciting, and it's got a lot of humor. And at the same time, you know, the music, the sound effects fit in very well. To me, it's a very successful marriage of a soundtrack and visuals, and it manages to create a lot of tension. And it's funny.
Come on in, bring me the hydros battle.
And conceptually, this was a difficult sequence because with all these rocks out there, you couldn't really tell what was up, what was down, or anything. So I came up with the idea of adding this asteroid belt in the background that you can see, that sort of the planet Saturn has a belt on it that sort of gives you an idea of what is up and what is down, sort of a horizon line. So that's throughout this whole sequence. And that kind of orients you to where you are, which helps you understand spatially where all the rocks are moving and what the ships are doing and everything like that. And it gives a nice graphic to the shot too. The asteroid elements, most of these are made up of styrofoam and covered with plaster and motion controlled by moving by the camera one frame at a time, pre-programmed, and, you know, doing it dozens of times and putting them together and you have one shot. So it was an awful lot of work in all these separate elements. And there was a middle ground asteroid ones that we made where a lot of asteroids, little rocks about a half an inch, are tied on little strings and sort of moved by themselves back there and comped in, sort of to get, so you had different scales of rocks.
Didn't want to be around when I made a mistake. This could be it, sweetheart.
I take it back. You're going to get pulverized if we stay out here much longer.
You can argue with that.
Pulverized?
I'm going in closer to one of the big ones.
Closer?
I think this is one of the best special effects shots in the film where it makes this turn. It goes through here and then comes into this little valley.
That looks pretty good.
That looks pretty good.
And does this move, which is an upside down move, and goes into the hole where they think is a big cave. Well, it is a cave, but they don't know what's inside.
I hope you know what you're doing.
Two.
Saturday matinee serials, the love story is much more like it is in these first episode 4, 5, and 6. Because the episodes 1, 2, and 3 is a backstory. It has a tendency to be more involved in developing characters and developing plots. This is telling a story. That's just sort of telling where the story came from. And it does put a big shift away from the plot and onto the characters. Because usually what a backstory is just sort of laying out who the characters are, what their problems are, and how they got to be where they are, as opposed to telling a particular story. And that's the sort of the shift between this trilogy and the first trilogy. The first trilogy is about the father. This trilogy is about the son. And even though it's a continuing story that follows sort of the family saga, it does break down to one's the father's story and one's the son's story.
The movies were, he said, structured like an opera, so that Act 2 is always tragic. The heroes are thwarted, and it ends with tragedy. So usually Act 2 is the most action-packed, interesting, unresolved act of a 3-act play.
I'm not a big fan of shooting actors against blue screen and then putting in everything later, because they just get to the point where they don't know what's happening. So anything you can do to support the actors and having the set be there so that they have a feel for what the atmosphere is like is very helpful. We built the whole swamp because it worked better that way than trying to build part of it, a few shots, and then blue screen all the rest.
I think Peter Suchitsky did a great job of lighting here, because you have to ask yourself, where's the light coming from? Well, we kept the lights on the ship, see? Plus the ambient light gave us a reason for the close-ups so we could see the faces, or you wouldn't be able to see it with ambient light alone. It wouldn't be bright enough. So I kept the lights on the ship in the water. The water was only about 3.5 feet deep with frogmen underneath, keeping the ship in place and doing all the stuff that you're going to see. He made it. So now he's swimming to shore. There's still contact between the two of them. I think Mark is an incredible actor, by the way. The way he got into this thing and made everything totally believable for himself and for me. And of course, there we are. Oh my gosh, isn't that awful? That there's some kind of a monster under there. We can't tell how big yet. But the fact that it can swallow R2-D2 means that it must be pretty big. Oh, one bubble means trouble. And all these little devices, like a bubble here or there, and of course the regurgitation here. We don't know. Either it was regurgitation or it was a little rocket that R2-D2 sets off. It doesn't matter. It happens, and that's what matters. He's free. And, of course, he's got slime all over him. If you were in a monster's mouth and a stomach, you'd have slime all over you, too. It's a wonder the metal doesn't fatigue.
You don't know.
I wanted him to also spit up a lot of the mud and water, and so we had arranged for that. See, everything has to be arranged before you get on the set, or it won't happen. With a little burpy sound, thanks to Bert.
Now, the sound of Vader's helmet being locked onto his head was produced by putting one's hand over the end of a vacuum cleaner pipe while the pipe was sucking in the dirt. And you put your hand over it, it would make a sudden thunk sound as your hand went over the end of the pipe, and that became what was used for Vader's helmet locking onto his head.
That ship, not excuses.
Yes, Lord.
Just that second and a half of his head. Was it a head or what was it? Was it a brain? You couldn't tell. I never wanted to show too much of Darth Vader. This was the only time you saw anything of him real. This was a set that I particularly liked. It was where Darth Vader spent his time.
It's quite possible this asteroid
Recordings that we did in the train yard of cars being banged into one another were used for the Millennium Falcon lurching back and forth while it's in the cave.
Sometimes I just don't understand.
Oh, actually, this might be some leaning acting. I'm not positive if they moved the thing or had us lean. And I'm always doing these incredible jobs with wrenches and things, fixing the...
Being held by you isn't quite enough to get me excited.
Sorry, sweetheart.
This is where it started, though, the sort of prissy, you're taking up a lot of my time, Princess Leia. I am playing this character, and this is, I suppose, how I'm considered to be, and maybe this is what I'm like, and I cannot believe it, but it certainly isn't a reach for me to play it, and it's devastating. But that's what, when they have me play myself, they have me play Carrie Fisher like that.
I was the only human being on the call sheet for months. But, you'd go to lunch and you'd see Billy D and the other characters all running around, and it was very separate. And then I'd hear stories, they're up in the Millennium Falcon doing this and that. And it was very episodic. And I'm sure when we went to Tunisia in the first one, Tony Daniels and I were able to really bond very strongly because, that was almost like a whole separate movie. We kept following the Jesus of Nazareth crew around. And I kept thinking, all the glamour of the 4th century.
Still, I had to come up with another Jedi. I had killed Ben off, who was older and wiser and shorter than Ben, to train Luke. That was the beginning premise of Yoda, and I decided I wanted something very small and very unassuming and very wizened and old, and that sort of thing. And so I worked with Joe Johnston, who was my chief designer at that point, along with Ralph McQuarrie. I actually gave them both the assignment. I said, I want a 3-foot-high, wizened little gnome-like creature. And they started drawing various pictures of it as I was writing it. And I would say, I want this one, I don't want this one, make him taller. There's a whole series of drawings of the way he's evolved into what he actually is today.
Great warrior. War's not to make one great.
But the essence of the fact that he was this super master teacher, sort of the ultimate Ben Kenobi, stayed there. I think we have green versions and blue versions and all different kinds of versions of him before I finally picked and evolved the version that we've got now. I was using Alec and the Ben Kenobi character as the chief influence. So I want something like this, the same power, the same strength. We then try to transfer into a puppet.
No!
Hey, you could have broken this.
No one ever said, here's what Yoda has to be. Yoda could be anything. We sort of gravitated toward it was almost like combining a leprechaun and a troll and a gnome and giving him this sort of quality of being very wise. I think the one thing I remember George saying was he's 400 years old.
Or I will help you.
I don't want your help. I want my land.
He showed me the original sketches, and I thought, well, that's interesting there and there, but I want something in more depth, you see. And so I looked in the mirror, and I thought, well, something perhaps a little bit amusing about my face, or at least I could get that in. So I modelled something of myself. And I thought, now I've got to make him look intelligent. But then I remembered I've been collecting photographs of famous people for quite a few years. And I got Einstein. Everybody knows Einstein and knows he's got a lot of wrinkles that, people remember. So on top of what I'd roughly done of myself, I then put the Einstein wrinkles in all around. And, of course, Einstein got a moustache. So all I did was to model his lip up a little bit and then put wrinkles in it that could be similar to the moustache that Einstein had, but it was still a lip. It was sort of half and half. And there are all the rest of the lines they associate with intelligence, not really knowing that they'd seen something similar that they know associate with high intelligence, you see. And it seemed to work more than I ever thought it would, but it did somehow. That was Yoda.
One of the very, very difficult things for me filming was that we'd be in the middle of a shot and suddenly George would say his eyes went out with anger and he'd come up. Yeah, they're out. Now I'm right behind those eyes. He's looking right at me saying, you screwed up.
Well, of course I'll have to replace it.
Or the wonderful scene where Han Solo is about to kiss Princess Leia for the first time and 3PO rushes and, oh, pardon me, sir. And as I did that, I heard and felt something fell off and crashed to the floor. And I went, and you're there and you just don't want to do things again all the time. And we didn't do it again. But if you slow that bit down and go through frame by frame, you will see an arm greebly. It had fallen off, but it goes so fast and you don't see it unless you go delicately frame by frame.
I'm only trying to help.
Would you please stop calling me that?
When you work on a film like this in the editing room, you're forced to listen to every bit of dialogue over and over and over again as you go through the inner workings of a scene and putting it together. So you often go home with these lines stuck in your head. I can remember this line, "My hands are dirty too," that everyone on the crew picked up on that line, and you'd hear it right and left from members of the crew. We'd be doing something, we'd be at lunch, and a conversation would end with somebody saying, "And my hands are dirty too." All taken from this moment with Han Solo.
My hands are dirty.
My hands are dirty too. What are you afraid of?
Afraid?
And look at the look in her face. I think it's beautiful. And he is so pushy, isn't he? He's very masculine, Han Solo. And she resists to the end. But when she leaves, it's not a smile. He's pretty unhappy because he was getting somewhere with Princess Leia. So he represents every young man who's been in this situation.
Oh, you're perfectly welcome, sir.
It's George's vision. And Kirsch was able to service that, was able to, absolutely see what he wanted to do and deliver that. And it's not easy to do that. And people would get in the way of it. And Kirsch really understood it and was able to even deepen the spirituality. There is such a thing in it. And there was, the whole mythological content of it and the relationships, which is what's ultimately, if that doesn't work, then the film isn't as interesting, even if it does have all that spectacle.
You have to keep Darth Vader alive, and he has to be a constant threat. Everyone's afraid of him. Our principles are way down in the hole. And here is Darth Vader talking to the big cheese himself, the Emperor.
Is the offspring of Anakin Skywalker. How?
The only thing that's changed in this movie and the DVD is the Emperor, scene between Vader and Emperor. See, at this point, we say different actor. They've since now photographed Ian McDermott, who played the Emperor. He's been placed into those scenes. And there's a little bit of change in dialogue there. But it was mainly to get consistency with the look of and the sound of the Emperor, since it was in the original Empire Strikes Back, it was a different voice and he had different eyes. And it was a different face of the Emperor, so that's now been made consistent with the other films.
He would be...
The other change they've made is to change the voice of Boba Fett, once again using the actor that played him in Attack of the Clones. A lot of the thunder that's part of the atmosphere in Dagobah are actual thunder recordings, which we purchased from a man named Tad Staples. And Tad has devoted his life to recording thunder. And he has done it for 30-some years. Tad is blind and spends almost all of his time in a world in which sound means everything to him. And he grew up in the Midwest where there were thunderstorms in Indiana. And I saw an interview with him once on the Today Show because he's quite knowledgeable about the sound of thunder, having reported so many storms. And I got in touch with him and invited him out to California back about the time that Empire was made. And as part of that acquaintance with him, we obtained many of his thunder recordings, which we used, over the years for thunder in these films.
Powerful Jedi was he. Powerful Jedi.
Oh, come on.
Well, it was Kirsch who directed it. He did a magnificent job. I mean, he really was very, very instrumental in how Yoda was first seen to the public, shown to the public. And he was the one who really pushed for that impishness there in the beginning. He deserves a lot of credit for Empire, and George knows that. He's always said that. But he also deserves credit for Yoda and how Yoda was first presented.
Like his father.
Was I any different when you told me?
I think this is the first time in film that a puppet made out of plastic, rubber, electronics, wire pulling is made to be actually alive.
Ben, I can be a Jedi. Ben, tell him I'm ready.
Ready, are you? What knows ready? For 800 years have I trained Jedi. My own counsel will I keep on who is to be trained.
It is not considered a puppet. You don't think of it as a puppet. You think of it as alive. Because I wanted to be able to eat. It can't show emotion except for the ears moving and the brow furrowing. That's the only thing that shows emotion. And, of course, the voice. And, of course, Frank Oz, who was part of the Henson team, was creating the voice of Yoda. And we had a good time with that.
Excitement.
Frank is a very wonderful person to work with.
These things.
Every set with Yoda is about 5 feet or 5.5 feet off the floor of the stage, with holes cut in the stage where Yoda would stand. And it's always done with hands coming up and wires being pulled and the eyes moving. And Mark, in doing the scenes with him, is doing something really remarkable. He can't hear anything that Yoda says.
Not afraid.
Good. You will be.
But it's the scene that makes him alive.
Another rule in sound mixing is that if you want something to sound loud, then it's best to precede it by some silence in a very quiet scene, such that the impact of something coming in suddenly can have all the greater contrast. This was what was done in the scene with the Minox appearing on the outside of the spaceship and jumping onto the windshield to scare everyone. If you'll notice, the soundtrack gets very quiet and almost down to nothing prior to that moment when the sound leaps out at you along with the visual.
Sir, if I may venture an opinion.
It's tough. You have to really concentrate. They'll say to you, now, the Minox are going to be outside the window. There's nothing outside the window. So you step up really. You have to concentrate. The most that you have to do is kind of be very centered and not distracted by things. There's nothing there. So you have to have a pretty good imagination and go with it. No one is saying to you, here's what a Minox looks like. Here's what a planet blowing up looks like. So you're going to have to do that for yourself. You have to assume that you're not going to enjoy your planet blowing up, that the Minox isn't something you like, because then you run out and you say, there's Minox.
An awful lot of moisture in here.
I don't know. I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah. Watch out! It's all right. It's all right.
There's a reoccurring slug theme, isn't there? Minox. There's this slug. Jabba. This guy would go inside him. In my opinion, it's a lot of slugs. Maybe it's not for you guys, but you haven't been tied to them and hanging out in their stomachs. And have to kind of think about, ew, we're walking around on a slug's stomach. You have to act that.
Waiter.
Now, the shrieks of the Minox were pretty much made up of recordings of horses played backwards. We had a little library of horse whinnies and snorts and things we had recorded at a ranch. And by taking those and in some cases speeding them up, but in every case running them backwards, you end up with a pretty good sound of a Minox shriek.
You can't make the jump at light speed in this asteroid field.
Oh, sweetheart, we're taking off.
Now they've got to get out of this thing. He realizes that, their teeth. And it's huge. And he gets them out of it just before, I think is a wonderful thing that was created. Now, Ralph McQuarrie, when I first came on the project, had a set of drawings made which became the basis for some of the biggest sets on the film. I think he was a genius in what he did, but he's one of the greatest designers that I've ever worked with.
I like a painting I did of Dagobah. I had these, what I called petrified forests. They were the roots of these gigantic trees that were gnarled and interesting looking to me. And I had painted several pictures of them that I kind of like. They tried to get them into the film, but there was so much to hand make, you see, that everything in the picture would have to be fashioned by hand and put into a set. And I think the set decorators just threw up their hands and said, we'll never get it done to make it look like this, you see. So they've solved the problem with a lot of vines they brought in.
When you're calm.
And draped around everywhere. So you had it brought it back to earth too much for me, but I understood their problem.
For knowledge and defense.
I think a lot of designers, artists who wanted, very ambitious to get into film, are rather disappointed when they finally get into it because their ideas that they think are just perfect are not brought into fruition on the screen. Ideas that I had that just got shunted away, like this big white spider on Dagobah, and creatures, and things. Now, with the new addition of digital imagery, you can make pretty much anything look like what you want it to look like. You can be as fanciful as in fantasy as you like, and it'll all get there on the screen if somebody's willing to put the time in on the computer to do it.
That place is strong. But the dark side of the Force, the domain of evil it is.
Although there's plenty of busy moments in the Star Wars movies where there's lots of explosions and gunfire, and those sequences have their own, meaning. Quite often those sequences, which are just ambience, creating a place with sound, can be more satisfying because you're able to really kind of, in a sense, give it a character, much in the same way that music can color a scene one way or the other. It can be made sad or it can be made spooky by the use of music. Likewise, the sound effects themselves can be used to create an ambience which functions emotionally much the same way. And of course, in a Star Wars movie, you're free to create off-screen noises which are unearthly. You're not bound by the expectations that people are going to hear familiar birds and insects, but rather you can create a whole world of unseen creatures with sound, which can be utilized to give it an emotional undercurrent which it otherwise wouldn't have.
Yoda is making him stronger. This is what it's about. He's strengthening his body, he's strengthening his character. So everything had to be used that way. I constantly had it in mind for every scene. You see, I've never read much science fiction. I've seen the usual science fiction film, but when I started this film, to me, I studied fairy tales, myths, fairy tales, because the fairy tale is the key to this film. And so that was more important for research than anything. I read the Freudian concept. I read the Jungian concept. I read Campbell, all these because they dealt with fairy tales. Darth Vader is just another enemy, but the real enemy is Luke for himself, and that's what that represented. Now, we think about it later and realize that this has been set up by Yoda. And R2-D2 is just amazed.
One of the little voices I did was this growling bounty hunter named Bosk, who leans down and makes a snide remark at these Imperial officers.
This is kind of a weird little scene where the bounty hunters are all these creatures, which gave the costumers kind of a break. They could have some fun with them. This was the equivalent, I guess, of the Star Wars saloon scene. And here you meet Boba Fett for the first time.
Lord Vader.
I think the first thing, the costume was fantastic. I remember the first time walking on the set, people looked, and then I thought, oh, well, this is only going to be a few days. But he was quite a special character. It's the mystery behind this uniform. And there are so many little gadgets on it that you need to see the film several times to think, well, what's that for? What's that for? What does this emblem mean here? So I was very lucky to be wearing a terrific costume. My boys came actually to the set to see Dad, and I remember my younger son saying, isn't it funny you put a bucket over your head, Dad, and, and people think you're rather cool. And the very first day was a scene with all the bounty hunters. And all I was doing was just standing and looking at Darth Vader occasionally and doing the odd nod as if I was listening and cradling the gun. It was very exciting because the first real science fiction film I'd done.
Moving to attack position.
I remember that I got so tired during the post-production, the final months of this production, that I got quite sick and had a really bad ear infection. And it was so bad that I couldn't fly or ride on an airplane. So I was commuting back and forth between San Francisco and Los Angeles, where the mix was taking place. And I was going to the mix all week where I was trying to use my ears to hear carefully, but I couldn't. They were so clogged up. And then I would drive home on late Friday night, get up here and do some editing over the weekend, and then drive back Sunday late in the day to be there for the mix on Monday morning. This was before we had our own facilities here in Northern California to do the actual mixing. So Empire was done at Goldwyn Studios, and we got, great artistry there with Bill Varney and Steve Maslow and Craig Landaker mixing, but it was always difficult to travel back and forth. The editing room and my equipment was up here, and it wasn't easy to make quick changes and things. So it was after Empire that we built our own facility here in Northern California, and we were able to carry on with the mixing here, keep it all under one roof.
I scheduled Yoda last shooting into Yoda's house in the Bog Planet because it was only Mark Hamill and Yoda. The other actors all gone.
Are you?
The first day that we were ready to shoot the Bog Planet was a huge set on this big stage we built for The Empire Strikes Back, which was the same size as the one Shepperton Studios that we'd gone out to use previously.
Totally different.
And the first day that we went to go to work with Yoda, he wasn't ready. I'm going, I've got nowhere else to go. We started shooting on Mark Hamill.
No.
By day 2, he was just ready enough that we shot on him. It was like that, right to the end on that. Yoda was the biggest problem because it was right at the end and he still wasn't ready, but he did work. We did it successfully. Frank Oz was brilliant.
I don't know if Yoda was explained to me. I mean, I saw the rough drawing or rendering of it first. I was with Jim Henson and gang in Los Angeles making the first Muppet movie. George had a book there, and Jim was there, and he opened it up. And I saw not the Yoda today that we know exactly, but very close, and I just kind of knew what the character was. It happens sometimes. Sometimes you work for a year or two to get a character, and sometimes it just comes, and it just happened. I just knew what it was. Regarding the actual character Yoda, it was really in the writing that Larry Kasdan and George's writing that I learned about Yoda, more than talking about it, because it always comes from the writing, first of all. And it was terrific.
My ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is. Creates it, makes it grow.
And then I really latched on to the idea of the syntax. And I asked George, I think, if I could push that syntax further into kind of that Yoda speak. But it was all there at the beginning. It was Larry and George's writing. That's how I learned about Yoda mostly.
Between you, me, the three, the rock, everywhere. Yes. Even between the land and the ship.
But Luke is so beautifully in character throughout the film. I was very, very pleased with him. As were all the actors, I must say. Carrie surprised me. She was wonderful, and she was very young. I don't know, she was 18, 19 at the time. And now he's despondent. And Yoda has to pull it out of the fire. He's got to show his power of what Luke should be able to do. That's what he's demonstrating, you see? And he comes to see. And he's amazed. There, the full force of the power emanating from Yoda. In order to shoot the puppet, we would do rehearsals. We'd put a little earphone into Mark's ear, and Frank would say, oh, it's a Jedi you want. And Mark would hear it, and he'd say, why am I even talking to you? And then Yoda has a little thing in his ear, down below, and he says, oh, so you're that kind of person, whatever they say, you see. I don't remember the dialogue anymore. I once had it memorized. And by rehearsing it many times, I give Mark a lot of credit for this. Rehearsing it many times, you pulled out the earphone and you shoot the scene, and it was timed so that we could fit the words in later, you see, which would be recorded by Frank Oz later properly. Meanwhile, they were all looking at the television sets below and pulling strings and things, and it was totally non-electronic. It was all mechanical.
Apology accepted, Captain Nida.
You don't want Darth Vader to be your boss. He's very intolerant of failure. So we normally kill everybody off who fails, except at the very end.
I had them pick up the body to take it out, and made it much more frightening. The actual act of killing, the violence is one thing, but to actually go and take the body away makes it real for me.
Don't fail me again, Admiral.
And now he's a worried admiral. He's got to make it work.
Deploy the fleet.
These models are detailed, just like in the first Star Wars, with lots of parts from model kits that could be that the model shops guys would put together, and just give a lot of detail on things, make lots of interesting looking ideas that you would think you were seeing things, but they're really sort of a lot of nonsense. And the trick on them, of course, is the fundamental shape of the design is what adds a lot of power to it. The triangle shape on the Star Destroyers, or the round shape, on the Falcon. That's really what you sort of think of. But when you get deeper into looking at them, it's just about little gribbly things that your mind fills in as to being functional.
What do you have in mind for your next move?
Well, if they follow standard Imperial procedure, they'll dump their garbage before they go to light speed, and then we just float away.
The rest of the garbage.
Primarily because the stage we were shooting on up here in Northern California was not very big. The size of the models could never be very big because our shooting stage was only probably about 50 or 60 feet long and maybe 20 feet wide, and we had other stuff shooting in there also. So we couldn't make very big models like we do today, or like we did on Jedi.
That is not a system. He's a man. Lando Calrissian. Just card player, gambler, scoundrel. You'd like him.
Nice.
Bespin, it's pretty far with
I
him.
like that. I like that he embarrassed me. That was my character then. I liked working with him. But we had fun. But this is sort of pleasant between us. So that was nice. That never happened. But I think it happens again and again, a little bit from now on. And I say to him, "You're not as bad as I thought," or some drivel like that. I do kiss him. I kiss Cuddles.
Have your moments. Not many of them. But you do have them.
A lot of the mechanical sounds in this film, such as the Millennium Falcon detaching from the Star Destroyer as it drifts off with the space junk, were recorded on board the aircraft carrier USS Constellation. And we sent a two-man crew out there to record the sounds of jets landing and taking off and all the mechanics on board the aircraft carrier, the elevators, the catapults, the mechanisms for stowing the aircraft, the motors, and all of those sounds that are only heard on board an aircraft carrier.
Concentrate. Feel the force flow. Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities sometimes with what Anakin Skywalker would say and what Luke Skywalker says to keep the idea or the theme moving in terms of their story, how their stories progress. It's the same thing with Obi-Wan. There's a lot of reminiscent things going on between the two films, different harmonics, so to speak, but it's the same piece of music.
Leia! Control. You must learn control.
The favorite phase of the movie is when you're there at a moment when something really comes alive for the first time. And that happens more than once in the making of a film. There's the first time that a scene gets cut together and you see it as an editor. It's very hard to evaluate the success of the editing in these films until you've put some sound in and can screen the film with the sound being there to give it a sense of naturalness and credibility. Because sound extends the credibility of the world there, in the image. It fixes it in a place. It gives it a context. So there's always been a lot of effort put into always doing temporary mixes as we go along in the post-production process. The first assembly of the film, they'll have temporary sound, they'll have temporary music, maybe temporary dialogue. But in addition, it's also great because you can experiment with sounds during those temp mixes.
No, I don't. Meanwhile, here is the Millennium Falcon coming to Cloud City. And we heard about this friend of his who he thinks will help them because the ship needs a little work. But right now it's kind of an unfriendly entrance into the area. They're being followed and shot at. This, to me, is one of the great shots of ILM where it goes into the cloud and out of the cloud. I think it's wonderful what they did.
Thank you.
If you notice in the background, you'll see little guys turning their heads sometimes in some of the models in the accompanying spacecraft there. Right here, see the little guys turning and looking at the back spaceship. So there's lots of details like that we put into these models when we could to help show the scale of them, if you could actually see people inside of them. This massive city floating in the clouds and a very tough sequence to work on. But if you look at the ideas here, what you're seeing, this had never been done before. The idea of a city with lots of futuristic buildings all jammed together, really sort of deco-y kind of designs, really nice looking. It's been copied in so many films since then. And I think this was probably the first time that it had really been done with this density and futuristic look on everything that I can think of. It's really quite remarkable in the design of it, but a very difficult sequence to pull off.
And there are days in San Francisco looks like this. There's also there's a thematic issue going on here of sort of concentric circles of they're kind of in heaven, only when they fight, they're in this forgery, this red hell in the middle of this sort of capsule, sort of a world within a world within a world, rings of worlds, which is very Eastern in nature. They go to where they think they're going to get sanctuary, and they ultimately find the devil there. There's actually a lot of things like that going on that if you were to peel the movies back, there's a lot of symbolism, a lot of motifs, and a lot of concentric circles going.
Here where they're walking out, here's a map painting there. Instead of building a big model back there, we could paint it for a lot less money and sometimes make it look a lot more real. So the film has got those paintings in it throughout. All these films do. All throughout them. Dozens and dozens of paintings.
How you doing, you?
Look at Empire, and it's broad. You've got the whole Cloud City and all the interiors of different landscapes that are way beyond what we'd done before. So I think it was the breadth of the work is just amazing. We're not just trying to dumb down the sequel or do it cheaper. We're going to do something that's even bigger and better.
Fair and square. And how you doing, Chewbacca? You still hanging around with this loser?
I think they probably should have put me on a half apple because I look like a real midget in this shot, too. How far down he looks to see me.
I'm the administrator of this facility.
Look.
And who might you be?
Leia.
Welcome, Leia.
Look. Like I'm a little teeny. There's a smiling.
Hello, sir. I am C-3PO Human Cyborg Relations. My facilities are at you.
Really? What's wrong with the Falcon?
After we'd finished each shot, the sound crew would come up to me saying, can you record that again for us just wild? Because we can't, it's terrible. Because the original would sound like... So I would stand outside the costume. And the odd thing is, at that point, I began to develop something that when I'm dubbing or doing a radio or a commercial or something, even without the suit, I do stand like C-3PO because I actually create his voice at the top of the lungs. So 3PO is very high up because he's nervous, And when people are nervous, they get a bit kind of panicky. Their voice tends to go up a few notches, so they get panicky like, oh, my goodness, oh. A 3PO is constantly in a state of panic.
Oh, nice to see a familiar face. Ichuta. How rude. That sounds like an auto unit in there. I wonder if... Hello?
So even when he's at rest, he's somewhat ready to panic any moment, sir.
Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. No, please don't get up.
Your actual personality has to come through a costume like that. Otherwise, there's no point in having a human being in there, which is what is, I think, is unique about Chewie. It's the way that I walk. It's the body gestures. It's the head movements. It's the eye movements. And it's everything, which has got to come from the inside. Therefore, this is what makes Chewie so unique.
But Han and Leia will die if I don't.
You don't know that. Even Yoda cannot see their fate.
But I can help them. I feel the Force.
But you cannot control it. This is a dangerous time for you, when you will be tempted.
The capacity I was hired in was as a performer, as the guy who brings this little character to life. That was my capacity. That was my job.
Remember your failure at the game.
But I've learned so much since
It's
then.
always difficult, like any other performers I used to work with, because you're holding your hand up, you're looking down at a television monitor, and you have to relate to whatever that person's up there through that monitor and handle props in a two-dimensional world, which is flipped in the monitor, because the monitor is not mirror image, it's flipped.
On this all depends. Only a fully trained Jedi Knight, with the Force as his ally, will conquer Vader and his Emperor.
It takes a long time, years of training to do that, just to get to that point where you can understand it. And the physicality of it is just really physically hard. That's okay, that's the job. Any character that I've done, you do have to make it your own. You have to be part of your bones. I think I made it my own the moment I saw that character on the drawing. I don't know what it was. There's something, I knew aspects of that character. Or I guess to be more detailed, what I did do with the Empire script was a few things. First of all, I took as much information as I could from that script. What Yoda knew, what Yoda didn't know, what was Yoda's relationship to Luke, what was Yoda's relationship to Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'd go down and I'd have, a lot of pages, so I knew how he felt about every single person.
Miss Vader, mind what you have learned. Say if you can.
I will.
And I knew how he felt in that particular time when we saw him in Empire, when he was in Dagobah, when he was older. And then I actually kind of wrote a history of Yoda, about a 3-4 page history of how he lived and how he used to live and things like that. And then essentially I forgot about it. I never, essentially just the process of doing it brought it closer to me. And then, of course, the real answer of how you make a character as your own is you just do it. The more you do it and do it and do it and play around between takes, that's how you find it.
This is McQuarrie's design, Cloud City. Not bad, huh? Very nice. Real clouds. And look at her in there. That little piece is shot and the rest put into the miniature. Norman Reynolds really did a great job of design for these sets.
Something's wrong here. No one has seen or knows anything about 3PO. He's been gone too long. You've gotten lost.
Relax.
Oh, and look, we're boyfriend and girlfriend now. We're space dates. In that scene, I had to go out and make some kind of entrance. And they had me go out and they cleared the entire set. When I came in, there was no camera, there was no crew, there was no one. Oh, that was so funny to do. But I think that was the spirit of it because, like I say, there was this thing that you were making a classic or something. Not a classic, but I'm just saying you were making a film. You knew all the crew from before, and this thing had happened in the meantime. And so there was this kind of heightened sense of what you were doing. And so there was more goofing around, I think, on this film.
The wide shots of Cloud City were matte paintings, obviously, and the optical work. The interiors were something that I stole from all sorts of areas, really, from the interior of Leia's apartment, I think it was from the German School of Architecture, Bauhaus, in the 1920s, and that seemed to be an interesting way to go. So I designed her apartment in that way with recesses of various shapes within the walls. It really is a sort of concoction that tied in vaguely with the exterior, although most of the exterior was sort of circular. It's something that sort of evolved, really. I remember it was a big soundstage at Elstree that we couldn't have made it any bigger, really, without knocking stage walls down.
So you see, since we're a small operation, we don't fall into the jurisdiction of the Empire.
So you're part of the mining guild.
For me, Lando was just this wonderful, charming. I had a cape. I wore a cape. That just did it for me. I mean, I had this whole idea of myself. I mean, that suddenly I just transformed into, Lando Calrissian. Then, of course, there's this little girl, this cute little girl, and I had to do the whole hand kissing bit. I mean, it just part parcel. He came with wearing that cape. So that's what Lando is. But I also had that kind of suave, wonderful charm that I can every now and again throw around. So they used it. And for me, I was the first brown-skinned man to be in space on screen, at least. I don't know. I can't even think of anybody who's been in space who's a brown-skinned person.
Before you did. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, too.
I wanted to make Lando. I wanted the whole thing to be devoid of a whole racial thing. I mean, I really want to. And I know that when Lando was introduced, he was introduced because I think George was getting a lot of flack about, Darth Vader being the only sort of figure there, this big dark figure who's evil, who, personified evil. So I think a lot of people didn't appreciate that. So I think the idea of bringing Lando into the situation sort of clarifies things. It says that we're all involved in this whole question of the light and the dark, good and evil. But what I try to do with Lando is I tried to which I always try to do with all the characters I play. I seem to want to transcend all of these questions of those differences, like black and white. So I try to make Lando, sort of this man, a guy in the future. He was beyond all of that. There was no life about that, really. It's always interesting to create a character that has, is a sort of dual character. You're not quite sure about him, especially if he's cute. And I was really kind of cute. But look, this guy had this whole situation up there in Besman, in Cloud City. And all of a sudden, these people come in this spacecraft, and right behind them is Darth Vader. Now, everybody knows what it is to deal with Darth Vader. I even tried to go up against Darth Vader and realized that I backed down. I had to back down, and sort of figure something else out. But what Lando does, he creates a situation that buys him time so that he wouldn't have to lose his situation. But he ends up losing this situation because of these people anyway. But rather than create the complete demise of Han Solo, he had to go along with a certain procedure with the hopes of working it all out in some way, correcting it in some way. But he tries to do it, and it's pretty obvious that he tries to do it.
Lord Vader, what about Leia and the Wookiee?
They must never again leave this city.
That was never a condition of our agreement, nor was giving hand to this bounty hunter.
Perhaps you think you're being treated unfairly?
No.
Good. It would be unfortunate if I had to leave a garrison here.
This deal is getting worse all the time.
Of course, he is double-crossed by Darth Vader, who can do anything he wants. Or you're toast. Now... Oh, he comes to life. My head's on backwards. And he's arguing and complaining and all. And so he shuts him down. It's these interplay of the gadgets is very important for humor. Now, I was very impressed with Harrison's performance here, because he looked like he'd gone through hell. Oh, he's so tired. He's just been tortured. And Leia, of course, can now show her affection because he's weak. and women love it, I guess. When a man is down and out and weak, now she can be motherly to him. And this is really the feminine impulse, I guess. The women are going to hate me for saying this. And here comes the enemy. He set up the thing. He didn't tell them that Darth Vader was there. He didn't really help them.
He doesn't want you at all. He's after somebody called Skywalker.
Luke.
Lord Vader set a trap for him.
And we're the bait.
Yeah, well, he's on his way.
First, you fixed this all real good. My brain.
And so he gets another blow to the head.
Sorry, I couldn't do better, but I got my own problem.
And Calrissian walks out on him. This was a very important scene here for me. Very hard to do, to make it absolutely real. The characters, each character is very well defined. And I think Harrison and Leia are terrific.
Oh, this is so sad. It was unbelievably hot up here. And Harrison rewrote it to, I said I love you, and he said I know.
The facility is crude, but it should be...
And this is exactly when I thought, all right, I am going to write stuff, because I am not just going to be someone who's given pink pages. But Harrison was really good at it. He did do it with his character in mind, but, he furthered the story and so on. I got what he was doing, and I saw the value of it. And he did it well. I couldn't be someone who said he's just an egotist doing dialogue. And he and Kirsch did it, by the way. That was the other thing. It was like the guys went off and did the scene, and then I was handed the pages. That's when I thought, this won't happen again. He was very creative, and he was also about 15 years older, and it was just happening around me. And I just thought, I want to get in on this one too then.
Now remember, Chewbacca, have a responsibility for me, so don't do anything foolish.
I felt that this march was very necessary, and I sort of kept things moving. Lots of steam. That thing moves up in the middle of the big hole. We don't know what that thing is, you know. You don't have to know anything. And here comes Darth Vader. So now we're in trouble. And the fact that he's handcuffed means, you know, he's really in trouble. And Calrissian doesn't know what he's going to do.
I will compensate you if he dies.
Now comes a great moment where they have to say goodbye. Whoops. And of course, C-3PO was shouting out, "What's happening? What's happening? What's happening?" You know?
Chewie, this won't help me. Hey, save your strength.
The sounds are wonderful that Bert put on.
The electrical sounds snapping on Han. Actually, a bit of the sound was one of those rare moments in which the sound on the set was pretty good. The actual electrical snapping in that scene is from the actual production on the set, since they had a live spark coil. We added to it by putting some hum and things in it from the old Strickfaden collection.
I love you.
I know.
The illumination is created by two electrical rods burning. And we were at a theatrical supply company. They actually turned on a lot of these carbon arc lamps for us, and we had some microphones inside the lamps. But before the carbon arc would go on, just the sound of the arc, the motor which turns the arc on a lathe, made an interesting churning sound. And we took that sound and played it in a big echo chamber, and that became the basic sound for the carbon freezing chamber, the sort of undulating low tones. There's a little whistling sound that you hear when the carbon block is raised up out of the pit. And that was produced by taking a tiny little piece of flexible water pipe and touching it to a block of dry ice. And when the metal touches the dry ice, it actually boils away the dry ice a little bit, and that produces escaping gases, which, as they fly through the little pipe, made it into a little musical instrument. It was really just an accident. We were recording a lot of effects by placing metal against dry ice to get squeaks and sharp musical sounds, which are used for the lightsaber hits. But out of that experiment came a lot of other funny little noises that came out of metal touching the dry ice. You can put a coin on dry ice, and you can get a ringing, buzzing sound. And you can get a lot of good elements for laser guns and for what can be used for electrical sparking, as well as arcing of electricity from the metal and dry ice effects.
Did he survive?
Yes, he's alive.
Once again, that familiar dumpster that you can rent and have it brought to your own sidewalk is a useful tool for sound effects. The sound of the giant carbon block hitting the floor after Han is frozen is just the sound of the lid being slammed on the big garbage dumpster in front of my house.
Calrissian, take the princess and the Wookiee to my ship.
You said they'd be left in the city under my supervision.
I am altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
So this is when he became a coffee table. That's what we called it. Bye-bye. I like that guy's thing with the glowing and it looks like my hair with lights.
I didn't want to kill off Han Solo. I mean, Harrison wanted me to kill him off, but he said, no, I'm not going to do that because he has a part to play later on in the next film. I mean, when you're putting together a story, you're dealing with lots of different complexities. Part of them are technical in terms of getting characters to be where they need to be, and you have ideas of where you want things, scenes that need to take place, and how you maneuver your characters around to get them there. And it's especially difficult on a film because the physical realities, where in a book you can sort of move around much more easily in a literary situation, but in a thing about cinema is it works in time. You're going over a 2.5 hour period, and you're moving things around. And obviously part of the art of cinema is learning how to maneuver from place to place, story point to story point, without confusing the audience, but getting that fluidity that comes in really good novels of being able to, through chapter headings or just through stream of consciousness, move people around very fast and put them in a state of mind to get to a particular situation that you want to talk about. In film, you actually are stuck with reality to do that with, and you have a plot and everything. And if you're going to get rid of all your characters, you have to sort of explain how you do that. You can't just do it.
I loved her sticking her head out for one last scream.
That second installment was so grueling. And partially it's because, you know, in the sequence where we have the major confrontation with Vader, it's meant to be in a carbon freezing chamber. And the way they achieved that was steam. So it was like doing it in a sauna bath. That's why my hair's so wet all the time, is because I just sweated buckets. And it was done, again, I can't remember. This is all trying to go back and remember exactly how long it took, but it was weeks for, you know, however many minutes it's on screen. And there's no way, even if you do all the moves correctly, and there are mistakes. Bob Anderson was tremendous because here he is, this Olympic fencing champion, and he's able to make you look better than you really are. It still was just so hard. And, you know, the bruises and the aches, and, you know, it wasn't fun in the sense, you know, it wasn't like breezy fun. It was dark and serious, and you wanted to make it look really great, but it was so hot on that set, you know, and it was hard for me to complain because at least I had my face uncovered. I mean, when they could, Bob didn't have to have the face mask on if it was over his shoulder or from behind, and also too, you know, at the time I had a real enthusiasm for it all. So I think you wanted to jump in with both feet and do the best you could.
Coming down to do the last couple of shots onto the landing platform with a Falcon nest.
When we were on the set and it got too hot, he fainted. He had to go to the hospital from heat, from this woolen outfit.
Chewie went down, didn't damage the robot at all. Got up. Are you all right, Peter? Yeah. And this was Kirsch. He was very concerned about it. I said, you know, it's just dehydration. Working in a costume like that, with probably 40 pounds on your back, something's going to happen. Anyway, my stand-in that happened to be there, they tried putting the costume on, tried to do that similar shot.
You'd think anybody could do it. No, it just didn't walk and move like the Wookiee. He tried, but it didn't work. I had to wait for him to come back to get the shots.
This is another Joe Johnston design for the Boba Fett ship. I wanted something that looked completely different from anything we'd ever seen.
Arthur, where have you been?
Very surprising me a little bit to see some of the new shots. You know, these are old shots, but with things added. You know, they've done matte paintings and put windows in so you can see out. A lot of that was not there in the original movie. When Boba Fett's ship takes off, one of the sounds, principal sound of it lifting off, was actually made with a trombone, blowing a very bad and sour note.
No, Chewie, they're behind you!
I'd gotten the trombone in an attempt to try to do something more musical, but what ended up was a rather poorly played note, but it seemed to work well for the ignition of Boba Fett's ship, Slave One.
You have learned much, young one.
You'll find I'm full of surprises.
From the top of the stairs to the bottom of the stairs, that was Bob Anderson doubling Vader. If Dave had actually done that, we would have needed 3 times the thickness of wires. Really, the wire side, it didn't become a skill until computers came in, because then you could thicken up the wires and they could erase them with the computer. So it was completely safe. But, I mean, I, as a stunt performer, have been on very thin wires which have snapped. Fortunately, I always make sure there's a safety bed underneath to fall on. But, I mean, it was renowned in the 50s and 60s that wires snapped because they were so thin, because they were trying to hide them.
That was done kind of fast, him flying out of there, but I think you see it.
Impressive.
I worried about that. And here I used the steam. It's not steam, it's fire extinguisher stuff to make the whole thing kind of eerier, cutting the cord and having the stuff coming out. I tried it without it. It didn't work. It looked ordinary. So I just filled it up with all this carbon dioxide, I guess it is, which makes it much more mysterious.
Darth Vader didn't have a double in the first picture because of budget restraints and everything else. But when we came to what was going to be bigger fights, I talked to production, I talked to George, I said, I would love to bring a double in. So he agreed with me. So I brought in Professor Anderson, Bob Anderson, who doubled Darth Vader on Empire Strikes Back and Jedi on the sword fights. And you see, in any sword fight, you're only as good as the man you fight. Because if the man you're fighting makes a mistake, then you've made a mistake. And Bob Anderson and I have been working in movies together for 40-odd years, doing sword fights. Either I'm the villain, and I prefer to be the villain because the villain gets more money, because he's the one who falls downstairs, everything else, you see. And Bob, because he's tall, was always the hero. But he couldn't act. And this was the laugh between Bob and I. I said, Bob, don't act. Leave the acting to us. But anyway, Bob doubled Darth Vader, and he brought his own style with it. And that's why it was more staccato. It was bam, and stop. Then there was more walking and more pausing, which gave it more dramatic tension. And also, I worked a lot in the theatre, and actors have to do that on fights. So I was able to bring the dramatic side of it more to fruition than I could in the first Star Wars.
Now, this was a hell of a challenge. How to do this scene with these things flying at him and, in the wind and flying out of a window but you work it out. That was a stunt double who jumped and threw himself backwards out the window. I had to think much differently than I usually did. First of all, I couldn't move the camera on so many scenes that were important to move the camera for rhythm. To me, film is music. It's poetry and music. Poetry in terms of it's a shorthand technique, music in terms of rhythm.
Kirshner complained that there weren't enough corridors. I mean, there were corridors, but when people are running, they certainly use up a lot of sets. So, he had to really be ingenious and, place his camera in such a way that he could duplicate certain angles and, add to that. But it all worked finally in the end.
So I had to use cuts. So I use as much as possible action cuts. An action cut is where a scene goes to a certain point and the actor does this or that, and you cut to another shot in which the movement is continued, and the audience is fooled. The eye is fooled, and it looks like there's no cut. In fact, you ask them, where's the cut? And they say, what do you mean? Well, where the two pieces? What two pieces? They think it's one. It's very tricky because you have to create the rhythm in the shooting. So you have to know, you can't depend on editing. And George's style is totally different. He depends on editing to get things together and moving, and he does it beautifully. He's a great editor. I had to do it in shooting so that I could create that illusion of movement, because often, most of the time, I had to shoot static scenes.
I was always asking him questions because, you sort of felt you were on a need-to-know basis. Who's my father? Where's my mom? He lied. Of course. I mean, if he told me the truth, who could trust me? Although I think I'm pretty good in terms of keeping secrets, because they had to tell me what the surprise was at the end of the second one. And I really wasn't supposed to tell anybody, not even, other people in the cast that were friends of mine at the time. They leaked fake information. He said, "You don't know the truth. Obi-Wan killed your father." And I screamed, "No, just as it was meant to be." But they had taken me aside and said, "This is what he's really going to say." And within 10 days, it was in the British tabloids. Alec Guinness, head baddie in Star Wars 2. And that's because it's so impossible. I mean, if just people are on the set, there were extras in stormtrooper outfits and so forth. I mean, we were the only two on screen, but, and I don't know if they ever traced the leak, but there was satisfaction in having leaked bogus information. And I love surprises. You know, I wasn't about to blab it. And I thought it was such a great twist that no one would see coming. Because if I remember now, the first one, no one cared. There wasn't any interest in it. By the time we got there to do the second, there was intense interest. I mean, they buzzed our sets in helicopters up in Finse, Norway, trying to get shots of, I loved it too. It's a strange alien craft, you know, explore the far off planet in Star Wars 2. And it was like snowplows, where you could clearly read the brand name on the side, you know, Caterpillar or whatever it was. And that was just the difference between what happened between the first and the second.
I told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
Oh, that's not true. That's impossible.
Search your feelings.
When you see the films 1 through 6, it's a very, very different experience than seeing it 4 through 6 than 1 through 3. But the idea when Darth Vader comes on in episode 4, it suddenly has a huge, powerful effect because you know right from the get-go that that is Princess Leia's father. You know that when you cut down to Luke, you know that that's his son. And you realize that Darth Vader is this pathetic character. He's not this big, all-powerful monster. He's actually a pathetic man who made some wrong choices, who found himself trapped in the world of evil. You know, he made a bargain with the devil, and now he's living in hell. And the only people that can get him out are his kids.
It is the only way.
The ambience in the central air passage that's part of Bespin was produced with this old mechanical wind-making machine. It's a device which had an electric motor, and you could put little different rings into the little donut-shaped kind of washers into it, and it would spin, and like a musical instrument, the air passing over these little washers would make a windy sound. We got an old television antenna and rattled it for the sounds of Luke as he stands on this antenna.
This is where Mark's hanging now at the bottom of the Cloud City. This was very difficult to combine these shots and get these to look real with the difficulty of blue screen in those days and lighting and everything. But it came out still pretty exciting.
He's off the ground here, being held up with some nylon cords in case he fell. I thought Mark did a great job here because he really had to fight to hold on. With the wind blowing, you see the wind? His hair, the flap, and held up by his belt.
Leia.
And he turns on for Leia, because he knows he has some power. And she, of course, responds. And she really looks like she got the message. It was amazing. I said, "Don't blink." And she said, "Okay." And that's her eyes are wide open, not blinking. If she blinked, it wouldn't be as strong.
What about those fighters?
Should we just do it?
All right.
That's beautiful. They've enhanced all the sunsets and everything. And I think when we saw all of this, we were shocked because, of course, there was nothing there. All this stuff, you know. We were looking at pieces of cardboard on the set, but it was in the script.
Generally, when I'm working with another director, I say, this is your film, and I put my 2 cents worth in and try to, give my opinions about what I feel is important. And it usually works as a very good collaboration that way, because I'm not sort of lording it over the director with my understanding of special effects and what I thought we could do and couldn't do. So he kind of had a special effects expert on the set with him and helping him develop the way certain scenes went together, because I could tell him what we could and couldn't do it. So I really became more of a helper, more of an expert on the world of Star Wars and an expert in the world of special effects.
I don't know what he was breathing out there, but there must be oxygen on that. Because if there are clouds, there's water, there must be air. I had to, for myself, justify everything on a real basis so that it didn't get too far out. Because even though it's a fairy tale, there is a reality factor.
When George told me at the beginning of our sessions on Empire that Darth was Luke's father, I thought, oh my God, that's fabulous. Here was this wonderful fantasy that got back to some primal issues, which is, was my father a benevolent figure? Was he an evil figure? Am I going to be like him? Was he once a better person? And we knew that where the story was going. We were starting to build what isn't in the first film and is very strongly in Empire, is that there's a person behind the mask, that Darth has been something else. And this yearning he has to enlist Luke is not just a political thing. It's not just the bidding of the Emperor. It is an urge on his part to bring his son into the fold. So as soon as you're doing that in the movie, it's really interesting.
There are moments where a film comes to life. We'd always be working with a black and white, scratchy copy of the film. That's all we would see until we were almost done with the sound. And then one day we'd suddenly go into the theater and see it against a sharp, color-corrected picture. And that would make a big difference, and it would seem like a different movie. It would even sound different because of now the way your eye and your ear were, being exposed to the depth of everything you had done. And then there's that moment when you first see it with an audience, and you might be burned out, you might be tired of it. Seeing it with an audience gives you that perspective that an audience has, and you get to see it fresh.
When I was a kid, I really liked my Flash Gordon spaceships and my Buck Rogers squirt gun and stuff. But I was I'd really thought a lot of these things as a kid will do. And when I saw my stuff now take this place of these other artists that had done these things, I was kind of happy to be in that genre.
Now, it's very important here. His hand was cut off, which shows that Darth Vader's got more power than he has. These details are very, very important, and they give you the believability factor which you need, because there's nothing believable about this environment. He suddenly says, Father? He's in touch with Darth Vader suddenly through the air, telepathy. While we were editing, I did the first editing in London and then brought it to California, where they'd set up a beautiful editing room. And Ben Burt was on the first floor. I was on the second floor. They built me a great editing room with a kitchen and couches and a fireplace, and wood was brought to the fireplace, and I was spending many long hours in that editing room. But whenever I needed a piece of sound, I could go down and Ben would create it, or find something. I began to realize that he could do things that I've never seen done before with sound.
Barker can do it. I'm standing here in pieces, and you're having delusions of grandeur.
At the end of Empire, there's the scene, and it's called the hospital ship, and Luke is getting repaired because he's had his battle with Darth and lost his hand. Now he gets the mechanical hand, and everyone is together once again, and you see a whole fleet of ships flying away. And we did a lot of blue screen ships, very complicated, strange shaped ships that had to be lit very specifically. A lot of work went into it, and we were done with the movie. It was terrific. And we had a big wrap party. It was great. We saw the movie, and it was exciting in our work. We were very proud of all the work everyone had done and put so many long hours into. And the film was about to come out. Great. I left on vacation, and I get a phone call. George wants to add some more shots. And I said, that's funny. That's a good joke. It wasn't a joke. The film is coming out in like 3 weeks, and they wound up doing like 2 or 3 more shots just for the end of the film to take a little longer in wrapping it up. So you just never know. You can never let your guard down for a minute on these films because anything can happen.
Good luck, Lando. When we find Jabba the Hutt and that bounty hunter, we'll contact you.
I'll meet you at the rendezvous point on...
Some people always appreciate the fact that the face of this medical droid taking care of Luke, his nose and his mouth there is an old Shure microphone. It used to be the studio standard many years back, and it was built into his face. I might be wrong. It might be an Electro voice. It was a standard microphone of the recording generation before mine. You know, it's what you would have seen, you know, Bob Hope on, you know, his world tour, you know, using or something like that. I should know what it is, but I never used one myself. It was before my time, just before my time.
And the big nebula that you see outside the window near the end is actually a lot of talcum powder put onto a black disc. And it's a little talcum powder there, sort of rotating on a lazy Susan, you could say. Camera, and slowly rotated to look like it's a nice nebula, sort of give you a feeling of optimism in the future. Those guys were shot against blue screen in front of that, and shot in front of a blue screen, and then the background put in. The sort of kind of a variation on the Andromeda galaxy, probably about 2 or 3 feet across. There's a projector projecting a little image about 2 inches wide into the back of that model spaceship. It's probably 6 or 8 feet long, and the camera drifting by it. And we repeated the camera motion for all those other ships, which is how they all look like they're going in the same direction.
With Johnny Williams going to town, what a great composer. He wore out the trombones. They had to stop. They were splitting their lips. They had so much work on this, on the recording. George said, listen, I want to give you a little gift at the end of this film. I said, gee, that's nice. He says, you've always talked about going to Japan. You never went. I said, no. He says, well, go to Japan and do what you want to do there, see what you want to see, and send me the bill. And it was a big bill. Because I went to Tokyo, I went to 5 different cities, I flew first class, you know, on Japan Airlines. I had a bed on the airline. I stayed at the Imperial Hotel. I ate the best food, sent him the bill, and was paid. And that was his gift. Not bad, huh?
It is amazing what you can do when you have a vision, when you have an ambition, and when you can bend other people's will to your desire, despite the enormous difficulties of the production of Star Wars. The thing that kept it focused and directed, use the word in several terms, towards the ambitions was George's vision and his passion for the idea.
To make a picture this big, this complex, you need a team. And I must say, I think I had the best team as possible to have on a film. There was complete cooperation. Everybody loved what they were doing, no matter how difficult it was. At least they appeared to love what they were doing. It was tough, but we all felt that we were doing something good.